Welcome back to the Mythgard Academy. This is our 5th class on the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, and tonight we're going to do the first, a little more than half of Book 4. My goal is to get through the first 5 prose sections of Book 4. So we're not going to get so far as Providence and Fate tonight. We'll start with Providence and Fate next week. But we're going to do all the Book 4 up to that. And this part, actually, I mean, of course, like the stuff that comes after this is in some ways the most important part. These are the really, really big questions, and certainly the ones which the places where Boethius influenced Tolkien, clearly, most of all. So that's going to start next week. However, tonight is really kind of my favorite part, because tonight is when we are coming back to the problem of evil and taking all the work that Lady Philosophy has done in the first 3 books and coming back and applying it and seeing how the problem of evil works out in the end. So, all right. So let's get started. First of all, one quick announcement. Tomorrow afternoon, we're having a really special Signum symposium. Our department chair at Signum University, Serena Higgins, is going to be talking about her own work on Charles Williams. Charles Williams, of course, one of the Inklings, though one of the most neglected of the main Inklings. Very few Lewis and Tolkien fans really know that much about Charles Williams. Serena Higgins has done a great deal of work on Charles Williams, even editing a couple of his texts and sort of bringing them out again, so that to make them more available for people to read. So anyway, I strongly encourage you to attend that. That's tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. It'll be posted on YouTube afterwards. If you want to attend live, you can get the registration link on the event page on signumuniversity.org. So go to signumuniversity.org, scroll down a little bit to the event page. You'll see the faculty chat tomorrow, and that should be a lot of fun. So, all right, we are ready to talk about Boethius. Now, normally, I start off with some insights from the Latin with Tom Hillman. Tom unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight. He didn't have a chance to do his Latin stuff this week. So we have a substitute, which is going to be really fun, actually. And tonight, instead of looking at the original language, which again we always love doing, tonight we're gonna kind of do a similar kind of thing, but we're gonna do that from a different angle. I've mentioned before that Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy was beyond influential in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and for long periods of time. It was simply one of the minimum top 5 most read books throughout the Middle Ages. Its influence is hard to overestimate. So tonight we're going to look at one of the many translations of Boethius into other sort of local vernacular languages, and see how some of these ideas from Boethius that we're going to be looking at were manifested in other medieval cultures, and in particular one which is sort of fun and interesting, especially to Tolkien fans, and that is Anglo-Saxon. So this our stuff tonight comes courtesy of Signum student Richard Rowland, and on an Anglo-Saxon adaptation of Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. This is really fun stuff. So first, looking at how the whole book is kind of handled in the Anglo-Saxon translation. Richard says, first and most notably, there is no Lady Philosophy. Boethius is visited, after complaining of his betrayal by Wereldsalda, worldly joys, by Heoven Kund Wisdom, heavenly wisdom, who notably is referred to throughout the work with exclusively masculine pronouns for the simple reason that the word wisdom is masculine in gender. So one thing that you notice right away is that the whole connection to Greco-Roman paganism, which is so explicit in Boethius's original, right? The tie back to the old Greco-Roman thinkers especially the ancient Greek philosophers, especially Plato and Aristotle, right? And Lady Philosophy and her connection to the classical philosophical tradition. That gets done away, right? And instead of Lady Philosophy, with her explicitly Aristotelian and Platonic ties, we have heavenly wisdom in general. So it gets made more abstract. I mean, I know Lady Philosophy is already an abstraction, right? But still. Okay, let's keep going. And wisdom referred to by masculine pronouns, right? Don't get too hung up on wisdom's gender, though, because he is referred to throughout the work as the faster motor, the foster mother, or motor mother of Boethius's mind or soul. Mold with his bewenda. Tha yakneo hit switha sweltel his agena motor. That was se wisdom tha hit lang ertide and larda. Mind turned that way. It recognized very clearly its own mother. That was wisdom, who had trained and taught it long before. And he notes, of course, Boethius is referred to throughout the poem as mode or mind. Right, that is, Boethius himself is made into an allegorical character. So while in the Latin, right, Boethius was rooting this as a first-person account, right? He makes himself the protagonist. Well, I mean, kind of Lady Philosophy, of course, is the real protagonist, but he makes himself the protagonist of the story, right? Because it's personal. This is about his struggle, right? He was banished. He was unjustly condemned. He was imprisoned, or he's banished under house arrest. And so this is this is the story of sort of how he dealt with that. So there's it has this sort of very personal angle in the Latin. The Anglo-Saxon makes the choice to move away from that entirely, right? It allegorizes the whole thing, so that the Boethius character isn't Boethius any longer. It's mind, right? Like the human mind, and wisdom. Right? Wisdom is the mother or the foster mother of mode, of mind, the central allegorical character, which is kind of fun, right? So what happens next? This is my favorite part. After wisdom's first song, he/she, and it really is, of course, we really do have some gender confusion here, is joined without introduction or explanation by Yesheadwisness. Irvine and Godden translate this name as reason, which is probably a fair translation, as it is often used to translate ratio in the Anglo-Saxon adaptations of Latin texts. Breaking it down, it is Yesheadwisness. Shead is from sheadon, to separate, to distinguish. Wis from uwis, either a noun meaning that which is sure, or an adjective intended to describe something which is certain, sure, trustworthy, reliable. Yesheadwisness, the NES there is the making it into a noun thing, just like NESS in modern English. Yesheadwisness, which is grammatically feminine, by the way, is thus the ability to distinguish reliably between things. Anyone who has tried to follow Lady Philosophy's arguments in the Consolation knows how important this is to her. Boethius, after all, has gotten into trouble because he cannot distinguish with clarity between the things which are good, the things which are the good, and the things which only look like the good. So it is not unusual to see Yesheadwisness accompanying philosophy's Anglo-Saxon counterpart. What is so interesting is its personification as the feminine, inseparable counterpart to the masculine wisdom. Though, as noted above, we can't get too hung up on the gender thing without putting weight on it the text may not be able to support. So I agree both with that qualification and with the fact that it's kind of interesting that we split this into the two teams, or like split Lady Philosophy into a team, right? Wisdom and Yesheadwisness. But that concept of Yesheadwisness, right? That ability to distinguish or to separate reliably between things is a really, really cool concept, and to me, it's especially interesting, and I think especially insightful on the part of the Anglo-Saxon interpreter of Boethius, because if you're going to make it into a sort of a more pure abstract allegory, right, which obviously, like, they've decided that's the way they're going, right, that's a really fascinating element to choose. I mean, it's not a normal allegorical figure. There are lots of sort of stock allegorical figures that you expect to find all over the place, and wisdom is one of those, right? I mean, you often see wisdom. The person who, gives wise counsel to, the allegorical figure who represents, man, every man or the human soul or whatever, right? And usually, of course, you don't listen to wisdom and all that kind of thing. But okay, so Yeshayadwisness, right? Not a normal allegorical figure. But I agree with the Anglo-Saxon interpreter, really central to the Anglo-Saxon, to the whole Boethian argument, right? And in fact, Yeshayadwisness is, I think, sort of like the heroine of today's class, right? The heroine of the first section of Book 4. That's ultimately what Lady Philosophy is going to be coming back to here, right? As we return to the problem of evil, the resolution of the problem of evil is all about Yeshayadwisness, right? That ability to distinguish between things clearly, that clarity of sight. Remember, the mortal things being wiped away from Boethius's eyes there at the very beginning of Book 1, right? So that you can distinguish, so that he can see clearly and understand the meaning of things and distinguish things appropriately. So I love that concept. One more note from Richard on the Anglo-Saxon. This one is really cool too. The author of the Latin original refers to fortune, fortuna, throughout the first two books, and then switches to fate, fatum, in the last two. We're not going to get to fatum today. Fatum, of course, comes in with providence in the next, at the end of Book 4, but again, we're going to cover that next week. Boethius seems to make a distinction between them. Fortuna is a person, or at least a personification, related to the old idea of the goddess. Yes, the personification of fortune is ancient, of course. That's why, notice how it's not explained, or it barely even comes up, right? Like they both talk about fortune as if she was a goddess, right? As soon as she comes up, right? She's immediately personified. That's because that personification was already very popular. I mean, Romans were always talking about being fortune's favorite, right? Fortuna was a pretty popular sort of one of those Roman. The Romans were into these like abstract deities like victory and other kind of principles like that, rather than kind of people and normal proper nouns. So fortune was certainly one of those that they reverenced in that kind of way. Anyway, she has an active role in the universe, fortune does, one which Boethius laments. Fatum, on the other hand, is not a person, but rather is the unfolding of the divine ordo in the temporal world. Again, more on that next week. But the adapter of the Anglo-Saxon Boethius all but denies any personification of Fortuna. He translates both words with a word that should be very similar to readers of Beowulf. Weird. Weird, which usually is translated fate in modern English. The indication seems to be that the semantic range of weird includes both capricious changes of circumstance. The Anglo-Saxon word for this, which comes up over and over again in Beowulf, is edwendin, and that which is foreordained by providence. It is my argument, Richard says, that this sheds light on the semantic range of weird in other Old English works, such as Beowulf, right? People are used to thinking of weird as only that second thing, as fate, right? There is a weird upon him. It's, of course, Tolkien's use of the word doom is often very similar to the way that you can see the word weird used in Anglo-Saxon. So it's really interesting. I agree with Richard that it's absolutely fascinating that the translator of Boethius uses that word, weird, right, to translate both Fortuna and Fatum. I would have guessed Fatum. I wouldn't have guessed Fortuna. That's really cool. That's really interesting. And suggests, in a sense to me, one thing that I would almost be tempted to say about that is it's almost like it's a spoiler from the beginning, right? By the time we get to book 4, we're going to get to the fact that what appears to be Fortuna, right? That what appears to be sort of the capricious whims of chance is actually Fatum all along, right? So perhaps the translation is kind of, as I say, kind of giving us spoilers from the beginning. Yeah, cool. David asks, is the added character of Yeshayadwisness supported by the Latin original? Oh, heck no. No, there's nothing like that there. Again, the Anglo-Saxon translation is doing some like legitimately different things with the text there, taking Lady Philosophy and basically splitting her into multiple parts, because again it makes a different choice from the beginning, right? It's going to take the arguments of Lady Philosophy but take it out of the context of Boethius, the human prisoner in a particular time and place, right, who has his philosophical background, and so he is in discussion with Lady Philosophy, who sort of represents that traditional wisdom with which he's been instructed, right? And he's going to come back to grips with, himself and what he's learned and what he knows. Again, that's on the one hand what's happening, right? In the original, they just take it in a different direction, right? Let's take those same arguments, but instead let's make it into a kind of a psychological drama, right? Let's have mind talking to wisdom and Yeshayadwisness, and see how anyone's mind at any point, completely separate from any point in time, will and how that plays out and how this applies. Tony, I absolutely would call this an adaptation instead of a translation. Of course, all translations are adaptations. This is quite shamelessly so. It's as Richard was saying, he and I were talking about the Anglo-Saxon Boethius at Mythmood, and as he was saying, the translation of the Anglo-Saxon translation of Boethius is very Anglo-Saxon, and that's what makes it so much fun, right? But again, to me, going back to what I said about this at the beginning, one of the reasons I find this so fascinating, it's not just a way to say, like, let's kind of put it next to the Latin and see how true it is to the original. That's not even the point, right? It is an adaptation, but more it's like a kind of application, right? What we can see is the Anglo-Saxon adapter taking the Boethian ideas and bringing them into not just the language of the Anglo-Saxon people, but the whole like culture and way of thinking of the Anglo-Saxon people, and that's really cool. That's really interesting, and we can learn a lot not only about Boethius and what they thought about Boethius, but about the Anglo-Saxon culture and how these ideas that are being drawn from Boethius are being fit into it. To be able to see what does I've said everybody read this, right, and I've said that it was really influential. How, like, what kind of influence did it have? And it's really neat to kind of see that on the ground here, as it were. It's really fun. So yeah, Nick, I agree. It is a new thing. It is, absolutely. But again, that's fun. It's part of the fun, right? Like any adaptation. But anyway, so thank you, Richard. Richard's here tonight. Richard, I really appreciate your work on this. Thanks for your insights. That was really neat. I know Tom's going to be back, but Richard, I appreciate it. Maybe we'll get a little more Anglo-Saxon as well later on. It's really tempting, of course. I know that Luke wants me to talk about Chaucer's translation of Boethius as well, his Boece in Middle English, which is also fun. His translation is a much more direct translation, much less of an adaptation and more of a translation than the Anglo-Saxon one. But maybe we'll get a chance to as well. I mean, we talk about the influence of this in other places, we'll be going on about Boethius forever. But anyway, it's still fun to kind of glance at these things. All right, but let's get back to the Latin. Let's carry on and move forward into book 4. Just for those of you who haven't I haven't seen since last week. Just that you don't get alarmed if I start gesticulating. I got a cast. I told you my finger was broken last week, and they'd put a puny little splint on it. They decided that was not nearly melodramatic enough. They needed an enormous cast. So if you see some like weird red thing, it's just my hand, and I'm still like liable to gesticulate with it. All right, so at the beginning of book 4, we are ready to apply things, right? Book 1 we saw was primarily the diagnosis, right? This was Boethius saying what his problem was, and Lady Philosophy listening to him and saying, okay, I see the problem with you, right? And we got the diagnosis at the end. And you'll remember, what was the diagnosis? There were 3 things that he didn't know. She starts to ask him questions at the end and finds that he knows some things, which is good, right? He kind of remembers what a human being is, and he does at least remember that God is in control of the universe, and that's a big deal. But there are 3 things that he didn't get right. Remember the 3 things? What are the 3 questions? We'll start the quiz here. What are the 3 questions that Boethius doesn't know the answer to? The 3 things which lead her to say, okay, I know exactly what the problem is. You remember? Good, Stephen. What are you, right? Define what a man is, what a human being is. Remember, he said man is a rational animal, right? Everybody knows that. And she's like, yeah, and he's like, what do you mean, and? That's it. Man is a rational animal. So that was the problem. What's the correct answer? Remember, by the end of book 3, we've gotten the answer to all 3 questions, right? What's the real answer? What was he missing? Exactly. Yes, James. Man is divine, right? Exactly. It's not just that man is a rational animal. The human soul comes from God and is made in God's image, right? It ultimately is divine, and it desires to go back to the divine, just like my friend the paperclip before desire. I don't know what happened to that paperclip. I don't even know. Desire, because it was a Charlotte paperclip. It's probably still in North Carolina, which is where it's home. It's where it wants to be, right? Anyway, so it just as the paperclips fall to the earth because that's where they want to be, just as the fire rises up to the sphere of fire above the air because that's where it wants to be. It wants to go home and to return and to rejoin the rest of its element. So too, mankind, the human soul, wants to return to God and sort of participate in the divinity of God because that's what it is. That's where it came from. It was made in the image of God. So, okay. That's the first question and the correct answer. What was the next question? Yes. How is the world governed? Rachel, exactly. How is the world governed? What was the second question he got wrong? What's the answer? Love. Yeah. Love is how the world is governed. Amor. Yeah, excellent, Tony. Yeah. In Latin for the bonus points, right? Yeah. Love. Now, what does that mean exactly? We got that. We got that in poetic spoiler form, right? Fairly early on back in book 2. What does it mean to say that love governs the world? How is the world governed? What is the mechanism by which things are made to work in the world, right? What is the mechanism? The mechanism of love is love in what sense? Yes, Tomas, attraction between objects, right? It's about desire. It's not only God's love, which is of course the whole sort of ultimate source of all of these things, but because all things in their different ways come from God, they also have love. They have desire, right? It is desire that makes the entire world work the way that it does. Everything through this natural inclination that Boethius has talked a lot about, the Lady Philosophy has talked a lot about, right? To show that things want to be where they want to be. All things naturally do what they're supposed to do. It's love. It's that desire that has been placed within every one of them that we can see all over the place, right? This is true of inanimate objects. It's true of human souls. The difference is inanimate objects just do it, right? They don't have a choice. They can be restrained from it, but they don't need to be encouraged to it. They don't have to go, like deliberate, right? The paperclip doesn't be like, what do I don't know. Maybe I'm sick of going down to the ground, right? Maybe I'm going to strike out on my own. No, it does it, right? Human souls have a choice, right? People can find the good or they cannot find the good. They can return to God or they cannot return to God. And that seems to be in their power, right? The choices that humans make in how they live their lives and how they see things, right? So that's the difference. But again, everything functions the same way. So again, why is it, remember Boethius asking the question, like, why is it only in human affairs, God, that things aren't orderly and things don't work? Everything else works perfectly and is this beautiful system, but humankind is not? Well, there we go. That's why, right? Now, what's the third question? So, what is a man? How is the world governed? And the third question was? Yes, Ben, you had said it before. Ben Vetter had said it. And Colin Hazlitt here. Good. To what goal is the world headed? Right? Okay, so we talk about how it's governed. Towards what? What is it striving for? What is the purpose of everything? And what's the answer? Toward the good, Jennifer, exactly. Everything is going towards the good. God, who is the source ultimately of all things, is also the destination of all things. Everything is moving towards the good, right? The good of, a rock or a paperclip might be simpler, right? The good of the human soul is participation with God. It's divinity, right? To become a God. To become God, in fact, to join with God. In participation. To become divine. So that's the goal. So the what is man question is about sort of origins, right? What is the inner nature of man? What is the significance of the human soul? How is the world governed, right? It talks about that process, that innate desire to return to the good that all humans have because of what they are, right? Because of the human soul, because of the nature of the human soul. And then third, the goal and destination of all things is the good, right? That's what everybody wants. And this is something, of course, you will remember Lady Philosophy has repeated many times, right? All people seek happiness. It's a fact, right? Everybody seeks happiness. You can tell how even just by how everyone's seeking it badly, right? And even by the people who are screwing it up, show that everybody seeks it, right? Everybody agrees that they want to be happy. Everybody is attempting to satisfy, everybody has the desire, and they're attempting to satisfy that desire, right? Lady Philosophy argues that some do it better than others, right? More successfully than others, but everybody has that desire and is trying to satisfy it, right? Okay. Kevin Hensler says, would they have quantified this stuff in the ancient and medieval world? Like before Newton, did they have like units of love that would account for the parabolic trajectories of falling objects? No, I don't think so. I can't remember any unit of measure. They didn't calculate motion in the same ways. I mean, that's one of the things that, again, it's like another one of those things, right? Newton didn't discover gravity. Like, believe it or not, folks had tumbled to the fact before Newton that things fell when you dropped them, right? No stupid apple had to hit Newton on the head for people to figure out that gravity happened, right? The thing about Newton, right, was his laws of motion, right? The way in which he was, Kevin, sort of pushing things in exactly that way. The observations that he made about these general patterns of motion, which were of a different kind than people had before. This just wasn't really a question that had been very important to people, to natural philosophy. They knew a lot about gravity. In fact, again, I mean, I know I've said this before, but they knew, for instance, that gravitation directs towards the center of a sphere. Not only did they know that the Earth was a sphere, but they knew that the gravitational center, that gravity would have a gravitational center at the center of the Earth, and that if you went past that, gravity would work the other way. This is in fact dramatized in the in Inferno. Right, if you've read Dante's Inferno, you'll remember that down at the center of hell, which is not an underground, it's not like a cave, it's more like a pit. It's like a chasm. It's in fact the chasm that was made when Satan fell to earth, and the earth shrank away from him. Right, so it's like the crater that Satan made when he hits the earth. That's what hell is in Dante's construction. And so Satan is down at the bottom, and they need to crawl to the other side because, of course, Mount Purgatory is in the southern hemisphere. So they get down to the bottom of hell, and then they actually like crawl down the nasty, hairy sides of Satan as he's lodged in the ice in the ninth circle. And when they get down to the bottom, to the center of the earth, right, they actually have to like turn around upside down and start climbing up again. They know exactly how gravity worked. So there was a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things that they understood well about things like gravity and motion, but they didn't do a lot of quantifying. Kevin, I can't think of any clear instances of that. Does anybody know what where the center, what's at the center of the earth, according to Dante? Everybody know this? Satan, yes, but what bit of Satan? It's important theologically. It's not his belly button. Yes, Tony, you've got it. It's his genitalia. Dante makes like a slang penis joke when they reach a certain punto, which is a slang Italian word for penis. So yeah, it's Satan's genitalia, which is at the center of the world. This is a point with important theological implications, actually, and kind of really emphasizes the thing that modern people almost never understand about the geocentric worldview of the Middle Ages. Everybody talks like the geocentric worldview, the geocentric model, elevated the earth to like be super important, like we're the center of the universe. No, Satan's genitals are the center of the universe. Like being at the center of the revolving universe was not a good thing at all. It's the outer rings of the universe that are the good stuff, right? That's where heaven is. So the picture is almost exactly inverted. When Copernicus comes along and says like, hey, the earth is actually in space, right? It's, and he suggests the different model. He wasn't demoting the world, as so many modern people think, right? No, see, the earth isn't the most important thing. It's just another rock going around another sun, right? That wasn't the point at all. Copernicus thought he was elevating the earth, right? No. The earth is in the heavens too. We're awesome also, right? We're not like the offscourings of the universe. We're not this like isolated, crappy little place with Satan's genitals at the center, right? We're like another one of the stars, right? They thought that was actually the like up with earth and humanity movement. The traditional view was quite the opposite. Sorry. Okay. Digression. We'll move on. Okay. Yeah. So, all right. Where were we? Getting towards book 4. That's where we were. We were summarizing. Okay. So we got our answers to our 3 questions. We're now ready to apply all of this, right? Back to the original question. And that's what Boethius brings us, the Boethius character brings us back to at the beginning of book 4. Right. When she had finished and seemed about to continue her discourse, I broke in, still depressed by my personal grief. This is the first reference back to his personal grief we've had since book 1, basically. Right. This is, I think, a really important point. Right. He has heard everything, and we've seen how enthusiastically Boethius supports everything that Lady Philosophy has said. Right. So he gets all that. It's fine. Right. But what's he lacking yet, right? Application. He still needs to apply it to his own situation. He doesn't see exactly. Like, all that stuff is great. That's fascinating. All those things that you've been saying about fortune and good fortune, how, like, good fortune is actually bad fortune and bad fortune is actually good fortune, and, all these other things we were looking at last week. This is all cool, Lady Philosophy, but I'm still in prison and it kind of sucks, right? And so he's still wrestling with this. O guide to true light, all that you have so far told me is divine in itself and perfectly convincing by virtue of your argument. But, although the sorrow caused by my misfortunes has made me forget these truths, I had not always been ignorant of them. Here, though, is the greatest cause of my sadness. Since there is a good governor of all things, how can there be evil? And how can it go unpunished? Think how astonishing this is. But it is even more amazing that with wickedness in full control, virtue not only goes unrewarded, but is trampled underfoot by the wicked, and is punished instead of vice. That this can happen in the realm of an all-knowing and all-powerful God who desires only good must be a cause of surprise and sorrow to everyone. Right? So Boethius comes back and says, okay, great, but we still have an evil problem, right? Evil is still a problem. For pretty much the same reasons he was pointing to back in book 1, right? So let's look at the elements here again, right? So Boethius, what is the greatest cause of your sadness? How can there be evil when there is a good governor of all things, right? That's the general statement of it, but there's more specifics that he gives, right? How can the evil go unpunished? Even if evil happened, right? Even if evil were permitted to occur, how can it go unpunished? Right? I mean, it's strange enough that people should have the power to do evil when the world is governed by a good God. But how on earth could that go unpunished? How do they get away with it? It's astonishing. But it gets worse, right? Wickedness is in full control, right? So often we see this, right? The world is run by wicked people. And no, I'm not making a contemporary political reference. This has always been true, right? This is true no matter who's president, and would have been true no matter who'd won the election. Wickedness is in full control, and virtue not only goes unrewarded, but is trampled underfoot by the wicked, and is punished instead of vice. How can that happen? How can anyone get away with that? Surprise and sorrow, right? Must be our reactions to such a situation. Good. Look at Lady Philosophy's response. Time for some yeshad business. Philosophy answered, it would indeed be a monstrous thing, and astonishing to everyone, if, as you suppose, in the well-ordered house of so great a father, the vilest objects were cherished, and the most precious were regarded with contempt. But this is not the case. For if our previous conclusions are valid, and with the help of him whose kingdom we are now speaking of, you will discover that the good are always powerful, and the evil always weak and futile, that vice never goes unpunished, nor virtue unrewarded, that the good prosper and the evil suffer misfortune, and much else which will remove the causes of your complaint and strengthen your convictions. And since under my guidance you have understood the essence of true happiness, and have found out where it resides, I shall now run through the steps in my explanation which I think necessary, and show you the path which will take you home. This, in a nutshell, is Lady Philosophy's answer to the question of evil. And on the surface, it seems like a completely audacious answer to the problem of evil, right? Why is there so much evil? Why is there so much injustice, right? Why do the bad guys win? That shouldn't happen if there's a good God. And Lady Philosophy says, it doesn't happen. The good guys never lose. The bad guys never win. Virtue is never unrewarded. Nobody ever gets away with evil. It doesn't happen. There is no problem of evil if you have a little yeshad business, right? Let's look at some of the details here. But first, we stop for a poem. My wings are swift, able to soar beyond the heavens. The quick mind which wears them scorns the hateful earth and climbs above the globe of the immense sky, leaving the clouds below. It soars beyond the point of fire, caused by the swift motion of the upper air, until it reaches the house of stars. Notice, by the way, if you're familiar with the layout of the geocentric universe, you can see, right, so the wings of philosophy soar beyond the heavens, there meaning the sky, right? So you can, if the mind that wears the wings of philosophy, right, leaves the earth, climbs above the sky, right, that is above the air, leaving the clouds below, beyond fire, which is above air, right? So the realm of fire is the topmost point, the outermost point of the sphere of the mortal world, right? And it crosses into the immutable, crosses into the ether, crosses into the heavens, right? Into the land of the planets, and the regions of the planets and the stars, right? There it joins Phoebus in his path, or rides with cold old Saturn, companion of that flashing sphere, running along the starry circle where sparkling night is made, right? So go up, we're now up to the sphere of the sun, which is the third of the celestial spheres, and we're out to the sphere of Saturn, right, which is the seventh of the celestial spheres, and then finally to into the starry circle, right, out into the sphere of the fixed stars, which is the second to the highest and furthest of all of the spheres. And this is important because we have gone out to, in medieval cosmology, the realm of divine providence, right? The place where God's providence is encoded, which is in the sphere of the fixed stars. When it has seen enough, that is the mind wearing the wings of philosophy, right? When it has seen enough, it flies beyond the farthest sphere to mount the top of the swift heaven and share the holy light, right? The geocentric universe was a 3D universe, very definitively a 3D universe, but they didn't think of it as going out. They always thought of it as going up, right? So when you go away from the Earth, you're always going up, even though they know like that it's 3 dimensions and it's a sphere, but nevertheless, they thought of it as going up. So you see, heaven is at the top of things, right? Earth is at the bottom of things. That's why, again, Satan's genitalia, right? The center of the Earth is the bottom of the universe, the lowest of the low. But at the top of the swift heaven is the holy light. There the Lord of Kings holds his scepter, governing the reins of the world. With sure control, he drives the swift chariot, the shining judge of all things, right? If the road which you have forgotten, but now search for, brings you here, you will cry out, "This I remember. This is my own country. Here I was born, and here I shall hold my place." Right? And Narnia fans, if you're thinking of what Jewel cries out when he finds himself in Aslan's country, there's a reason for that, right? It's a near Boethius quotation there. "This is my own country. Here I was born, and here I shall hold my place." That is the response of the Narnians upon reaching Aslan's country. Okay. Then, if you wish to look down upon the night of earthly things which you have left, you will see those much feared tyrants dwelling in exile here, right? Essentially, it depends on your point of view, right? If you are within the world, if you're operating from within an entirely worldly framework, the much feared tyrants, right? Those who are both powerful and wicked, who seem all powerful here in the world, right? They're the highest of the high, right? The emperor, the king, those who have absolute power over us, right? The 1%. They are the ultimate power, but only if you're down on the ground, right? Only if you're looking around from a worldly perspective. If you go up to the top of heaven and you look down at the little speck of the earth and you see the whole picture and how everything fits together, you realize those tyrants are actually dwelling in exile here. Their very tyranny is what exiles them, as we will come to see. Yes, Colin. Yeah, Colin says it reminds him of the Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, realizing that hell was just a tiny crack in the ground in heaven. Yes, yes. Of course, it's not. Well, I mean, really, actually, yes. The proportion is sort of similar. Everybody knew in the Middle Ages that the Earth was teensy compared to the size of the heavens. The distance between the world and the fixed stars was so great that the world was like the size of a mathematical point with no dimensions. But so yeah, Colin, in a sense that we can see that same sort of thing. Kevin Hensler says, medieval cosmology is so difficult because it seems like metaphor blends into their actual models of the literal cosmos. The boundaries aren't clear. Kevin, we do the same thing. Our metaphors blend into our actual models of the literal cosmos. You can't do anything else if you're going to use language to describe things. The language that we use to describe even everything, right? Laws of nature, right? All this is a metaphor, right? We are continuously and persistently metaphorical. C.S. Lewis was great on this too. Modern scientific language is not less metaphorical. In a sense, Kevin, one of the reasons I like the medieval cosmology and its language better is that it's more self-aware of that, right? It kind of embraces that, whereas modern language and modern scientific terminology tries to pretend like it's objective and metaphor-free, right? It's not metaphor-free. None of it is metaphor-free. Anyway, yes, Stephen, Boethius did mention the business about the size of the Earth. Absolutely. Yeah, good. Let's see. Tomas, that's a good point. Somebody else had mentioned something about this earlier on as well. Tomas says, it seems that for Boethius there is no doubt about which people are good and which people are evil, unlike for Tolkien. Yes and no. It's certainly true that Boethius uses very black and white terms, right? He talks about the wicked and he talks about the good. I think the thing to remember here is that this is they're talking in sort of philosophically abstract terms, right? So in a sense, they're kind of deliberately simplifying. They acknowledge at several points that like people are, everyone's like on the road, right? No one is there. Even good people haven't arrived at the destination, right? They haven't achieved the good. They're just on the path to the good. So it's not quite. I don't think that what Lady Philosophy and Boethius are arguing is that it's quite as black and white as that. Whereas, of course, when somebody like Tolkien is dramatizing good people and evil people and the fall of good people to become evil people and stuff, he's dealing with the whole thing on a different level, right? He's dramatizing exactly that, whereas Boethius is dealing with the sort of abstractions. Yeah. See, David asks, is Boethius referring to the idea that hell is separation from God at the end of the poem? About the exile? No. In fact, and this is important, I think, David. Later on, you may remember towards the end of towards the end of this first part of Book 4, the Boethius character brings up the question of eternal punishment, right? Punishment after death. And Lady Philosophy says, oh yeah, that's important, but I'm not talking about that. Right? These things that she's describing here are about life and about the sort of the state and the status of things. The much feared tyrants are in exile here in the world, in a sense, almost like Boethius was in exile. Right? Remember that was her diagnosis, was that he was self-exiled, right? The much feared tyrants are self-exiled, right? Self-exiled from their destined country, right? From their true home, from their rightful goal and endpoint. That's going to mean hell is related, but it's not a question that Lady Philosophy is much interested in dealing with, actually. She's talking much more about the here and now. So let's look at some specifics here. First, the question of powerlessness. So one of the things that Lady Philosophy has asserted and reasserts here. First, Lady Philosophy answered, "You will agree that the good always have power and the wicked do not." This is, of course, the first of these extremely counterintuitive claims that Lady Philosophy is going to make, right? These things that require our yeshayadwisness to be functioning properly, right? That first, this was, of course, one of the elements of the problem of evil as Boethius, the Boethius character voiced it, right? Why is it that the bad people win? Why are the bad people in charge, right? Why do the wicked rule? That shouldn't be able to happen. Her answer, they don't. It never happens. Evil is always powerless, and good is always powerful. That's how it is, right? Despite appearances. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's say, I'm skipping a bit here. Do you recall that earlier in our discussion we found that every intention of the human will is directed towards happiness, however various its inclinations may be? I remember that to have been proved. And do you also recall that happiness is the good, so that everyone who seeks happiness also desires the good? I have not forgotten, I said. Indeed, I hold it fast in my memory. Therefore, all men, good and bad, have the same purpose in striving to obtain the good. And then, again, skipping a bit more, the bit that I'm skipping here is where Lady Philosophy talks about, like, defining power, right? If you desire to, in order to be considered powerful, right, you have to have both the desire to achieve something and the ability to achieve it. Right? If you have both of those things, then you're powerful. If you don't, you're not powerful. If you have the desire for something but you can't get it, you're not powerful, are you? Right? If you don't even have the desire for something, and what does it matter, right? Therefore, since both seek the good, both wicked people and good people seek the good, but good men obtain it and evil men do not, it follows that good men have power but evil men are impotent. No, all of this stuff is built on the foundation. You can't just skip to book 4, right? It's built on the foundation of book 2 and book 3. Remember all of the review of the goods of fortune, right? Thinking about book 2, right? All that fortune stuff, about how remember Boethius says, like, why, Fortune, why did you take all my stuff? And what does she say? I didn't take your stuff, right? I took my stuff, right? It belongs to me. You don't own it. You don't own any of it. You don't own anything. All those things you call your possessions, they're not your possessions. They're not intrinsic to you. They're separate from you. You've laid claim on them, right? But they're not yours. I can prove it. Look, I'll take them away. I'll spin my wheel and down you'll come, right? So, okay, so that was one of the first steps of, we need to reorient our thinking here. The way that we're used to talking about things, the way that we're used to thinking about things, the basis on which we're used to judging. And in book 3, we come to the bigger picture, right? What is it that matters? What is the essence of all things? What does everybody desire? Everybody desires happiness. Everybody desires the good. All of our desire for everything else, for wealth and power and honors and fame and everything else, and therefore everything else that we reach for and strive for and value and care about because we think they're going to lead us to those things, right? All of those things are only bits and pieces, remember, of our desire for the good. It is that fundamental desire for happiness which we have attempted to obtain in fragmented ways. But as Lady Philosophy has shown, by seeking it in fragmented ways, we don't obtain it, nor do we even obtain the little fragment that we're trying to reach for, right? So in that, like, thinking in that context, recognizing what is it that, so true power is the ability to achieve your desire. Everybody desires the good. Everybody desires happiness. Evil people don't get there, right? They are powerless to achieve the good that everyone wants. They're powerless to achieve their own goal, which is happiness. Right? She comes at the same thing from a different perspective. Well then, she continued, the highest good is proposed equally to good and bad men. Good men seek it by the natural means of the virtues. Evil men, however, try to achieve the same goal by a variety of concupiscences, and that is surely an unnatural way of seeking the good. Don't you agree? I do indeed, and I see clearly the consequence of your line of reasoning, for it follows that the good are powerful and the wicked are impotent, right? Wicked people, by definition, right? What defines a wicked person are those that are invested in vice instead of virtue, right? People who do bad things, right? If you do bad things, if you are in, that means you're going after those worldly goods, right? You're seeking happiness, but you're seeking it in an unnatural way. It's not going to work. You're seeking only a fragment of the good, and you're going about it by a sketchy route. It's not going to work. Again, remember how much time Lady Philosophy spent on this, right? Can you achieve true happiness? Can you achieve the good? Can you achieve that divinity, which is the goal of human nature, right? Through vice, through the seeking of worldly goods by vice. No, you can't. It's not going to work. Exactly, Jennifer. They're stumbling drunkenly into the wrong houses. They're never going to get home. The power to get home is the only real power in the end that matters, right? The rest of it is all fleeting, temporary, and even indeed a distraction. It's not only just that it's lesser, right? It's not just that it's it's not merely that they obtain only a lesser good and not the highest good, right? It's not a matter of degree. The wicked who by vice set out to achieve happiness, because everybody sets out to achieve happiness, but those who do it through vice, right, who seek to do it through wicked deeds, don't achieve it at all. That's a big deal, right? And then this is what justifies Lady Philosophy in saying, let's understand something. Evil people are never powerful. Can they have authority in the world? Sure. But again, remember, she's dealt with power, worldly power, before, right? What is worldly power? What does a tyrant have control over? When you say that, like, wicked people are in charge in the world, right? That wicked people are powerful, what do you mean? What kind of power do they have? Remember, she talked about this before. What kind of power do they have? What can the tyrant control? Your stuff, your body. That's all that's in their power. So what? We'll get more to this as we keep going. Takako says, so wicked people are actually punishing themselves by going away from the true goal. Yes, exactly. They're harming themselves. They are preventing themselves. They are powerless. By their choices, they have made themselves powerless to obtain the only end that everyone wants, which is happiness. They have made happiness unavailable to themselves. Let's see. Tony says, when I was reading this, the question kept coming up for me of whether the only way evil can exercise power is through the good intentions of others. Is that an ends versus means argument? Hang on a second. I'm trying to figure that out, Tony. Only way evil can exercise power is through the good intentions of others. Well, see, no. I mean, no, because they're not wielding the power then. I mean, if something that they do comes from something good in somebody else, it's not them. Like, again, power is defined as the ability to get what you want. That's what power is, right? So if power is the ability to get what you want, their actions can't get them what they want, and therefore they're not powerful. James, you're right. They think they're obtaining the good, right? They may believe they've arrived. And as Lady Philosophy is going to go on to say later on in book 4 here, that as we'll look at tonight, if they're in that state, James, that's the worst possible state they could be in. If they're deceived to that extent, because it's not true, they haven't arrived. If they think they have, so that they stop even thinking that maybe they need to change in order to actually get where they're going, if they think they've arrived and they haven't, that's really sad. It's really sad. Exactly, Nick. Those pursuing evil means are wholly incapable of achieving happiness of any real sort. And Nick, it's that word real, of any real sort. They can achieve, like unreal happiness, right? They can achieve temporary, they can achieve a state which might be mistaken for happiness. They might get to a house that looks a lot like their real house, but it isn't their real house, right? And it's not going to get them any closer to their real house. And in the end, they're probably not even going to be able to stay there, and they certainly won't be permanently happy, even within the course of their own lives in that house, because it's not really their home, right? It's not true happiness. Exactly, Catherine. This explains why the rich can be so unhappy. Catherine, if you go back to all that earlier stuff about the goods of fortune, like the analysis of wealth, remember when twice she went through and looked at wealth and power and honors and all those other things, right? She's building off of that, but also if you take what she says here in book 4 and go back to those things, you can begin to see. She started with merely the observation. Notice that wealth claims to bring security. That's why everybody wants wealth, right? Because being secure is a good thing, right? Having a happiness that nobody can take from you, that's a part of the good. That is an aspect of the good. And wealth seems to offer that. But of course, wealth doesn't grant it. Right? Because when you have wealth, somebody can always take it away from you. So she's observed that the rich can be unhappy, right? That these things do happen. But now we begin to see why, Catherine, in exactly that way, because it can't get you. It can't get you home. It's just going to end up distracting you and confusing you and ending up, in the worst case, making you labor under the delusion that you've arrived home when you haven't. Yeah, exactly, Nick. Right, exactly. When you do seek wealth, it's never enough. Your income increases, so do your expenses. You never get a chance to actually rest. You never get at security. You never arrive home. You can't. It's not your home. So yes, Tony, evil is always self-destructive. Yes, it is. Exactly. Let's keep going. Think how grave is the impotence of wicked men. For the goal which they are pursuing is not a trivial or frivolous thing. They fail in the race for the very summit of all things. They fail miserably to achieve even the things for which they struggle night and day. And just here the powers of good men are clearly seen. For as you would consider an effective walker, one who could go on foot as far as it is possible to go, so you must consider him to be most powerful who achieves the goal of all human desires, the good beyond which there is nothing. An obvious conclusion follows from this. The wicked are wholly deprived of strength. For why do they neglect virtue and pursue vice? Is it because they are ignorant of the good? Well, what greater weakness is there than the blindness of ignorance? Okay, so that's no excuse, right? If that's a bad outcome, right? If they neglect virtue and pursue vice because they don't know any better, that's bad. That's not a happy state, right? That's not strength. That's weakness. Or do they know what they should seek but are driven astray by lust? Okay, that's bad too, right? If so, they are made weak by intemperance and cannot overcome their vices. Or do they knowingly and willfully desert the good and turn to vice? Anyone acting that way loses not only his strength but his very being, since to forsake the common goal of all existence is to forsake existence itself. And again, I'm forgetting who it was who was bringing up Colin, The Great Divorce, right? Again, thinking about C.S. Lewis's picture of hell in The Great Divorce might kind of come back up here. Lady Philosophy's assertions about like her answer to the problem of evil. Again, if you just state it by itself, right? Why do bad things happen to good people? They don't. Right? Ultimately, that's her answer to the question. Why do bad things happen to good people? They don't. She says they never do. Bad things never happen to good people. And that sounds like simply a complete denial. Like, all right, you've done this sophistry and like convinced yourself that black is white and everything's good, right? Okay, but how is that relevant to the real world, right? Lady Philosophy would turn that exactly upside down on its head and say, no. Your assertions about what you see going on around you, right? Your assertion that bad things happen to good people all the time, that good people are often powerless to do anything, and that bad things happen to them despite their goodness. What does that have to do with the real world, right? That's not the real world. That's not what really matters. You're not looking at the big picture. You're not using your sharewisness, right? You've got to... you've got to consider what really matters. She's looking at the big picture, right? Remember, from the top heaven, right? Looking down upon all from God's perspective. Nothing in the world matters. It's all, in the end, Tony, in one sense, this all becomes an ends and means question, right? And again, it's one of the things that she said about the goods of fortune and everything way back in book 2 and book 3, right? The problem is people mistake these things for ends when at best they're means, right? But of course the goods of fortune aren't even really means to the end. But if you're just thinking about brief and temporal things, Lady Philosophy says that's not what matters, right? Remember at the beginning of class when I said, on the first day when I said there are going to be lots of things, lots of times when it is going to sound really facile, right? Like, well, this is easy for you to say, Boethius, that like, hey, temporal suffering is no big deal, right? You've just got to look at the big picture, man. Like, okay, bad things, you might think that bad things are happening too, but they're not really bad, right? Not if you look at the big picture. And one might be tempted to, if one is going through difficulties in one's own life, it might make you want to reach out and smack Boethius and say that's easy for you to say, Buster. But remember, he has lost everything that he has. He is unjustly imprisoned and is going soon to be executed for that. So he knows, there probably aren't too many people listening to this who could actually one-up Boethius as far as his actual personal situation is concerned. He is suffering to a very significant degree. So it's in that context that he is saying these things, that, that Lady Philosophy is pointing to this stuff. Yes, exactly, Brian. Lady Philosophy argues that you have to change the way you view and think about bad things, what you define as a bad thing. Exactly, Nick. It is. I do think I would agree, Nick, that Sam Gamgee has a Boethian moment, right? In that beautiful moment when he sees the star in Mordor, right? And realizes that the shadow is really just a passing thing after all. The hope that leads Sam Gamgee to, roll over and go to sleep next to Frodo, right? And trust that everything's going to work out. That's a Boethian moment, right? In that moment, Sam has an insight, which is something like what Lady Philosophy is pointing to here, right? Sam hasn't worked out all this stuff, right? He's not thinking in Lady Philosophy's terms, but that fundamental insight. In the end, look, I mean, things look pretty bad just then in Mordor, right? But even from there, even with what they see around them, even the situation that, the sort of horrible and desperate situation that they're in, at the end of the day, it's just a small and passing thing, right? There is light and high beauty that no shadow can touch. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's up in the top heaven, right? And the thing that Lady Philosophy would add to Sam there, right? The insight that Sam doesn't really vocalize, right, is, and this is your destiny. This is your home, right? And if your orientation is not towards that, right, if you get invested in the temporal things of the world around us, then you're like the drunken guy, right? You're staggering down the wrong road. You're gonna miss your house. Yeah. Kay asks a really interesting question. Okay, Kay says, talking about the end of this, about losing his very being, since to forsake the common goal of all existence is to forsake existence itself. Kay says, this sounds like a person who chooses to fully immerse in evil. A person who chooses to fully immerse in evil does not in fact exist forever in the never-ending torment of hell, but simply ceases to exist. I don't think she's talking about hell here. I don't think I quoted this in a passage because I didn't want to get too distracted about it. But remember what Lady Philosophy says about evil people, right? She says, I don't deny that evil people are evil. I deny that they're people, right? But it's not just the thing that she does with the animals, right? How they degrade themselves below the human. How she words it is much stronger than that. Lady Philosophy says, I don't deny that they're evil. I deny that they are, that they exist in any real sense, right? That is the way in which I think she's talking about forsaking existence here, right? Because again, here she's talking about, back to that first question that Boethius got wrong, right? What does it mean to be human? What is a human? What is the whole like ontological function of the human being? If an evil person is by definition one who has abandoned that, one who has turned away from that, they're not just like a person who has taken the wrong turn. They have ceased to be a person. They've abandoned personhood. They've abandoned existence, not in the sense that they are like, they pop out of being. Exactly. Again, it's not talking about, I don't think Lady Philosophy is talking about, literal, negation. No, wait, what's the word? Nothingness. Like the nothing in the never-ending story. That's not the kind of forsaking of existence that she's talking about here. Privation. That's the word I was looking for. The Shakespearean word. Privation. She's not talking about complete. Again, they don't just wink out of being, right? But they cease to exist in the sense that they are fulfilling. They are their destiny. They cease to be. They don't fit in to the whole picture anymore. They're unmen like Weston. That's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. See, Kay, when it thinking about hell and about continuing existence in hell, Lady Philosophy dodges that, or sort of pushes it aside. She's not talking about heaven and hell. She's not. She doesn't like refuse the afterlife. She acknowledges the existence of the afterlife and the significance of it. And by implication, Kay, she does say that the souls of evil people are not annihilated, right? Because she does talk about never-ending punishment. But she's then quick to turn the conversation back and say, but that's not what I'm talking about, right? So it would be, I would have a hard time trying to apply directly these doctrines with any to the question of the afterlife with any real confidence that I'm following Boethius's train of thought in that sense. Yeah, in a sense, yeah. Brian says she's offering the consolation of philosophy. Again, not the consolation of theology or the consolation of sort of spirituality. In a sense, yeah. I mean, I think it's not like it's not accessible to reason. It's totally accessible to reason. I mean, here we were just reasoning about it, right? My only question is that I'm not exactly sure how Lady Philosophy would reason about it, because she declines to talk about it here. And so I don't want to, I mean, I could do my own speculating. Of course, I'm usually not shy to do that. But it would just become my own speculation rather than trying to kind of capture what Lady Philosophy is getting at here. Yeah. Interesting, Jenny. Jenny Weissig says it reminds her of the talking animals that ceased to be talking animals in the last battle in the Chronicles of Narnia. Yeah, it's like that. I think that's a really good parallel. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Oh, a quick, somebody who I think was new here in the Twitch chat. Everybody's trying to achieve happiness. Well, this is been a basis of her argument for a long time. No, there isn't a middle ground. Because it's not about being content with how things are. The fact that you have desires of any kind, right? If your contentment itself implies a desire, contentment implies a satisfied desire, right? Anyway, yeah, no, there's no middle ground. Everybody is seeking happiness. Everybody is seeking fulfillment. There are many who feel fulfilled, right? There are like many wicked people, for instance, who through their wicked deeds get rich and powerful and die that way. Lady Philosophy is not sick. See, this is one argument. This is one argument that some people make, right? That some medieval thinkers made about this. They'd say like, well, it doesn't really work out long term, right? Like sooner or later, every evil person like will realize it, right? And like repent and regret it. And maybe they don't repent, but it's not going to work out long term. Lady Philosophy doesn't go there, right? She's like, oh yeah, there are definitely people who achieve worldly success, think they've arrived, and they die happy, right? Temporarily happy. They die content, thinking that they've arrived and that they've won. Right? And those people are the saddest people of all, right? We should pity the wicked, Lady Philosophy says, right? And the more deluded they are, the more pitiable they are. Let's keep going. Those high and mighty kings you see sitting on high in glory. This is from the poem at the end of section 2 there. Those high and mighty kings you see sitting on high in glory, dressed in purple, surrounded by armed guards, can breathe cruel fury, threaten with fierce words. But if you strip off the coverings of vain honor from those proud men, you will see underneath the tight chains they wear. Lust rules their hearts with greedy poisons. Rage whips them, vexing their minds to stormy wrath. Sometimes they are slaves to sorrow, sometimes to delusive hope. This is the picture of individual man with all his tyrant passions. Enslaved by these evil powers, he cannot do what he wishes. This is the picture of individual man. By the way, coming back to the whole black and white question, right, about how can you tell, which people are the wicked people and which people are the good people, and the way that in talking about these abstract categories of the good and the wicked, it sounds like Lady Philosophy is really kind of simplifying things and saying there are some people who are like great and there are other people who are really horrible, it's like probably my friends who are the good people and my enemies who are the wicked people. And I get, but I was talking about how this is, again, speaking in philosophical abstractions about goodness and wickedness, manifesting itself in human lives. That last sentence, we get a glimpse here, right? On the one hand, this poem starts off talking about that abstraction again, in a sense, right? Those high and mighty kings, those wicked people who are in power. And they appear to be in power. All the externals suggest that they're in power, even what they're able to do, right? They are powerful. They can breathe cruel fury. They can threaten with fierce words. But if you strip off the coverings underneath they wear chains, right? They are, in fact, slaves. Slaves to their own passions, slaves to the worldly pleasures that they have set up as their happiness, right? That they have defined futilely as their happiness, which is only keeping them from getting to their true happiness. But then notice what she does at the end of the poem. This is the picture of individual man with all his tyrant passions, right? So the wicked tyrant ruling a nation of apparently powerful, ruling a nation of people, that is itself only a metaphor for the tyrant passions which so often rule within the souls of individual men, right? So here we can see how the things that she's talking about in these kinds of abstract philosophical terms apply internally to everybody, right? We all have problems with passions and are often enslaved by our desire, by our passions, right? Enslaved by evil powers and prevented from doing what we wish, because all of those desires, are those desires which are derived from, which are corruptions of that seeking of true happiness, which make us take the detours, right, down the street of pleasure, down the street of wealth, right, all of those things that are leading us astray. We're bound to all of those things. We struggle with all of those things. Good. Three people at once were all reminded of Jacob Marley and his chains. David, Jenny, and Patricia, all three of you in the same timestamp, all made the same reference to the Christmas Carol. That's really cool, actually. Yeah. That's cool. And certainly, it's interesting to look at the Christmas Carol from a Boethian perspective, right? You can see some of these principles still at work there. All right. Oh, by the way, sorry, I should explain my. I was picking up on that not the Marley thing, but this last line about the individual man in my subtitle. I couldn't resist the subtitle. The subtitle is from Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. I just taught a Measure for Measure class in our Signum Shakespeare class last term, and so I've been reminded of that central speech. That central speech in that play. When Isabella says, "But man, proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, most ignorant of what he's most assured, his glassy essence, that is, the essence, the soul of him which reflects, because it's a glass, it's a mirror, reflects the soul of God. Most ignorant of what he's most assured, his glassy essence, plays such fantastical tricks before high heaven as makes the angels weep." Man is only dressed in a little brief authority, right? The apparent power of people is an illusion, right? It's little and it's brief, right? It's not real power. It's not real authority. And the tricks that people in power play are fantastical tricks in the end. That is, they're tricks of the fantasy, that part of your brain. It's up here. It's in the front part of your head. Everybody knows this. According to medieval psychology and neuroscience, that is. So your fantasy is what enables you to imagine things that don't exist, right? That you've never seen before. And so a fantastical trick is a trick of that kind. Ultimately, those who are wicked, who are claiming authority, but again, it's not just that, right? It's not just that the people in authority, as Boethius says here, it's not just that people in authority are playing fantastical tricks, right? Are imagining that they're greater than they are. We who see them that way are also being fantastical, right? We're not seeing reality. We're not seeing what really is. Tony says that Dickens uses the same phrase, brief authority, in the Christmas Carol. See, look at that. It's all in Dickens, right? It's all in Dickens. What do they teach them in these schools these days? All right. Do you see now, Lady Philosophy says, the mire in which vice wallows, and the light in which probity shines? This shows clearly that the good are always rewarded, and the wicked always punished. Remember, this was another of the elements of the problem of evil that Boethius was saying. Why does wickedness pay? Right? Why are the good not rewarded? And Lady Philosophy's answer, right? The good are always rewarded. Wickedness never pays. Ever, ever, ever. There's not one single example of things working out well for a wicked person, right? You might think you know of some, but you don't, right? The aim or goal of an action may justly be said to be the reward of that action. As in a race, the prize a man competes for is said to be the reward. We have demonstrated that happiness is the good for which all things are done. Absolute good, therefore, is set up as a kind of common prize for all human activity. Now, this prize is always achieved by good men, and further, no one who lacks the good may rightly be called a good man. Therefore, men of moral probity always achieve their reward. No matter how the wicked rave, the wise man never loses his prize, nor does it ever diminish. Good is always rewarded. It doesn't matter if they get money or power or pleasure or comfort. Again, those are the blind alleys, right? That's not the reward. The reward is happiness, absolute good. And they get that, and it can't be taken away from them. By definition, remember we did that in book 2 and 3, right? The good people always achieve their reward. And bad people, they have their reward, right? They strive for money. If they achieve it, they have their reward, right? And yes, I am deliberately echoing Jesus there. I'm deliberately echoing gospel language here because I can't possibly not think of that here in this passage. Yeah, exactly. They get what they strive for, but it's not what they really want. They've deceived themselves, right? The wicked are always punished. The good are always rewarded. The wickedness of others does not deprive virtuous men of their glory. That's not possible. No wicked person has the power to take away ultimate happiness from good people. Again, remember back to Boethius in book 1, right? Oh, the wicked people have taken everything away from me. And Lady Philosophy is like, no, they haven't, right? What have they taken away? They've taken away, remember Fortune? Like, no, they didn't take away your stuff. They took away my stuff. Well, what's his stuff, right? The only thing that is really his is true happiness, is goodness, right? And true happiness. And the wicked people can't take that away from him. By doing injustices to him, by taking away all of his stuff, by stripping him of his power, by demeaning his fame, all of the things that they've done to him, ultimately, beating him to death or strangling him, are they going to be taking away his reward? No. How can they? How could they? Right? That doesn't enter into it. It has nothing to do with it, with the achievement of the real desire. And what a reward it is, the greatest and best of all. For recall the corollary I showed you before and make this inference. Since the good is happiness, all good men are made happy by the fact that they are good. And we have already shown that those who are happy are gods. Therefore, the reward of good men, which time cannot lessen, nor power diminish, nor the wickedness of any man tarnish, is to become gods. Again, as she argued back in book 3, right? So, if God is good and all powerful, how is it that good people are, get the shaft? Answer: they never get the shaft. It's impossible, right? And those evil people who thrive, right? Since this is so, the wise men can be certain of the punishment of the wicked. No wicked person ever gets away with it. Ever, ever, ever. For since good and evil, reward and punishment, are opposites, the rewards of the good necessarily indicate the opposite, the punishment of the wicked. Therefore, just as virtue is the reward of virtuous men, so wickedness itself is the punishment of the wicked. Certainly, when a man is punished, he knows that he suffers evil. And, if they think about their condition, those who are not only tainted but even infected by vice, the worst of all evils, consider themselves free from punishment? Consider the punishment which afflicts the evil as compared with the rewards of the good. You learned earlier that whatever is one, and whatever is one is good. It follows then that whatever is must also be good. And it follows from this that whatever loses its goodness ceases to be. Thus wicked men cease to be what they were, but the appearance of their human bodies, which they keep, shows that they once were men. To give oneself to evil, therefore, is to lose one's human nature. Just as virtue can raise a person above human nature, so vice lowers those whom it has seduced from the condition of men beneath human nature. For this reason, anyone whom you find transformed by vice cannot be counted as a man. Wickedness makes people lose even themselves, right? Even that which they are, that which they seem to have, right? Again, it's not possible for evil not to be punished. It is its own punishment, because by its nature, you are preventing yourself from getting to the good. And in doing so, you're extinguishing yourself. Remember, because that's part of that definition of mankind, right? What does it mean to be human? What it means to be human is to be divine, right? And to be seeking to return to the divine by that desire, that love that is placed within us by God to bring us back towards God. Notice, see, I just did all three of the questions he got wrong in a row, right? That's the ultimate, that's the meaning of life. That's the whole point of everything. That's what it means to be human. To be evil is to deny all of that, ultimately to lose that. It's banishment, but it's self-banishment. Yeah. Yes, exactly, James. Evil distances one from God. Yes. And yeah, Tony, I agree. Tony says, it makes him think of like Darth Vader losing his physical humanity, right? Becoming like less and less a complete person. Gollum, right? Diminishing and withering, ultimately the wraithification process, right? Right, Tony. And Voldemort looking less than human. Yes, that's a common trend, right? That idea of sort of the degradation of humanity. The more Voldemort divides his soul, the less human he becomes, right? The more he tries to secure immortality, the less powerful ultimately his own soul becomes. And yes, what happens to all evil things in Tolkien ultimately, right? They destroy themselves, whether most explicitly with Ungoliant, right, at last consuming herself, or Gollum, or Sauron in his making of the ring, or Melkor in his dispersal of himself among all of his servants, and the iron crown that is beaten into a collar for his neck. This principle that evil is ultimately self-defeating, that in a sense evil is its own punishment, and it doesn't matter what the apparent results are during the course of our lives, right? Again, a wicked person can die, peaceful and cheerful and surrounded by wealth and pleasure, right? Again, at the end of the day, it just, from Lady Philosophy's standpoint, right, is just more sad. Good. Sorry, I'm thinking about Brianna's thinking about distancing from God and the void, as Tolkien depicted the void. I don't want to get sidetracked on that, Brianna. I don't think that's actually when Tolkien talks about the void in the Ainulindale. I don't think we're talking about sort of distance from God. The void in the Ainulindale is more like the blank canvas upon which creation is going to be painted, right? Not necessarily an absence from God. I don't see that as a sort of a sort of an ontological progression there. Anyway, okay. Talking about similar thing in poetic form. This is the Circe poem, talking about Odysseus, and of course the sorceress Circe, who gave the potion to all of Odysseus's men and turned them into pigs. Nevertheless, his sailors greedily drank the evil cups. They were changed into swine, and turned from food to husks and acorns. No part of them remained unchanged. They lost both voice and body. Only the mind remained, to mourn the monstrous change they had suffered. So, the conversion of Odysseus's men into pigs is taken as a kind of metaphor, right, of what happens to evil people. But see how weak was the power of the goddess and her impotent herbs. She had power over the bodies of men, but could not change their hearts. The strength of man is within, hidden in the remote tower of the heart. Poisons which can make him forget himself are more potent and deadly than Circe's, because they corrupt the inner man. They do not harm the body, but they horribly wound the mind. I love what he does here, right? First of all, notice on the one hand, he says, this image, right, this poetic image of the men being transformed into swine is like a metaphor for what happens to evil people. But wait, it's also an illustration of how wicked people can't really affect people, right? So the hearts of Odysseus's men weren't changed, right? They were turned into pigs, but if there were, presumably there were good men among Odysseus's men, right? And they would not be deprived of their reward. Circe could turn them into pigs, but she couldn't keep them away from ultimate happiness, right? So if there were good and virtuous men among Odysseus's men, they would have achieved their reward, and she could have turned them to pigs all she wanted, and it wouldn't have done any good, right? So it's both a metaphor for what she says happens to evil people naturally, and it's also an illustration of the ultimate powerlessness of evil people. Poisons and then she takes and uses the metaphor in a different way, right? The strength of man is within, hidden in the remote tower of the heart. Poisons which can make him forget himself are more potent and deadly than Circe's, because they corrupt the inner man. So again, back to that original metaphor, right? The passions, the vices, all of those temptations and ignorance and mistakes and wickedness that end up sending people down those wrong paths, right? Into things that they think are happiness, towards goals that they think are happiness, but are not really. These things are poisons, and they ultimately make him forget himself even worse than Circe's poison did, because they corrupt the inner man. Ultimately, what happens to evil people, she says here at the end of her poem, is the reverse of what Circe did, right? Circe changed the body, but couldn't change the heart. Evil changes the heart, even though it doesn't change the body. Wicked people still look like people, right? But ultimately, they're not. They've turned away. Pinocchio being turned into a donkey is totally a Circean thing. Yeah, absolutely. Evan, no, Boethius knew all the Greek stuff. Boethius read Homer. Boethius is right at the point of time when, but before before we lost Greek in Western Europe. So he had read Plato and Aristotle and Homer and everybody in Greek. In fact, he did many translations from Greek into Latin. So he would have actually known Homer. Okay. When she had finished, I said, I see that you are right in saying that, although vicious men keep the appearances of their human bodies, they are nevertheless changed into beasts as far as the character of their souls is concerned. Still, I wish that these cruel and wicked minds were not permitted to ruin good men. Notice Boethius is still kind of focused on, he's still not getting it, right? He's still looking at worldly things. Permitted to ruin good men, right? And she's like, they are not permitted to do that, right? That doesn't happen, right? As I shall show you at the proper time. If, however, the power which they are thought to have were taken from them, their punishment would be greatly diminished. Again, it's like when you look at things from the perspective of the top heaven, right? When you fly up with the wings of philosophy, you think it's like opposite world, right? Nothing works the same way that we assume that it works from our temporal perspective, right? We think that Boethius was just saying, right? And it's kind of awful that they're allowed to wield as much power as they do over good men, right? Wicked people, I mean, right? And she's like, if that power were taken away from them, their punishment would be less. Wait, so they'd be punished less? No. They would receive less punishment because the power that they have is their punishment. 4, though this may seem incredible to some, the wicked are necessarily more unhappy when they have their way than they would be if they could not do what they wanted to do. So an evil person who is thwarted is benefited, right? If they are restrained from pursuing their evil course, they're better off. The worst thing that could happen to an evil person is that they're given their head, that they're enabled to pursue the path that they want to pursue. That's the worst thing. That's the greatest punishment. Why do evil people win, right? Big picture, they don't, right? Because winning is defined as achieving the goal and they don't achieve their goal. But even within the context of worldly things, why do wicked people win? Because that's their punishment, right? Worldly victory. It's not just that it doesn't matter, because it does matter. It does matter because it is their punishment. Again, the worst thing that can happen to an evil person is that they succeed and that they end up believing themselves to be happy. Okay. Let's see. Wait, hang on. Where was I? Okay. The wicked are necessarily more unhappy when they have their way than they would be if they could not do what they wanted to do. If it is bad to desire evil, it is worse to be able to accomplish it. For if it were not accomplished, the disordered, that is the disordered will, right? That is the wicked will, would be ineffectual. So when you see someone with the will and power to commit crime actually commit it, you know that he is necessarily the victim of a threefold misfortune. For each of those three things, the will, the power, and the act itself, contains its own punishment. Yeah. It's bad to have the desire to commit a crime. It's worse to have both the desire and the power to commit the crime. It's worse to commit the crime, right? Worse for you, that is. Worse for the wicked person in question. So far, I've tried to make you see that the power of evil men, which you find intolerable, does not exist, and that those same men, whom you think go unpunished, really never escape the penalties of their wickedness. Further, I have shown that their apparent impunity is short-lived, that the longer it goes on, the unhappier they become, and that if it were eternal, they would be absolutely wretched. Finally, I have proved that wicked men who unjustly escape punishment are more miserable than those who are justly punished. And it follows from this that when they seem to escape chastisement, they are in reality undergoing more severe punishment. So you can see the summary of all that. I skipped the section where she talked about how wicked men who unjustly escape punishment are more miserable than those that are justly punished. But it follows the same principles as what we've been seeing before. Kay, by the way, notice she does kind of glance out the corner of her eye at the eternity question, right? At the hell question here. If it were eternal, they would be absolutely wretched. Right? Further, I have shown that their apparent impunity is short-lived, and the longer it goes on, the unhappier they become, and if it were eternal, they would be absolutely wretched. What is hell? What is absolute wretchedness? What is damnation? What is perpetual torment? Answer: continuing on in that same state. A wicked person who is satisfied with their wickedness and thinks that they've won and goes on into eternity believing that they've won while eternally being deprived, failing to achieve the goal and desire of their soul, that's bad, right? That's hell. And again, if you've read The Great Divorce, it's a lot like C.S. Lewis's hell, or rather C.S. Lewis is clearly thinking of Boethius in this. Yes, Stephen Cover is remembering Tolkien's comment, and we talked about this. Last night. That the how Tolkien calls death a gift. And in his letters, Tolkien says that, what of God's punishments are not also gifts, right? Yes, that equation between gift and punishment, or punishment and gift, right? That whenever God punishes or sends a punishment, it is also a gift, right? Yes, I do think that we can see some Boethius underlying that concept there. Yeah, and Tony, I agree. I think that you can look at the ring wraiths as an illustration of exactly the kind of thing that Lady Philosophy is describing here, right? Their desires, right? Their wicked desires, what they were willing to do in order to achieve the desire. They desired immortality, and they were willing to do terrible things, right? And to serve Sauron in order to get it, right? And they, on the one hand, they have their reward, right? They achieved it, and yet they haven't achieved it, right? They have the achievement of their desire is its own punishment. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good. The Boethius character does raise the objection that I know a lot of modern people have to Lady Philosophy's argument, right? To her answer, why do bad things happen to good people? They don't, right? And he's like, okay, when I consider your argument, I find that nothing could be more true. But if we consider the ordinary judgment of men, who is likely to find these ideas credible, or who will even listen to them? So he's like, okay, this is great. I'm totally convinced, but how could I tell anybody else about this, right? If I go around saying, hey, bad things don't happen to good people. Evil people are totally powerless, and good people are never deprived of their reward. Everyone's just going to say I'm an idiot, right? Because they can all see that it's obviously not true, right? That is true, Lady Philosophy answered, because men cannot raise eyes accustomed to darkness to the light of clear truth. They are like those birds who can see at night, but are blind in the daylight. For as long as they fix their attention on their own feelings, rather than on the true nature of things, they think that the license of passion and immunity from punishment bring happiness. Right? And that's a really fun definition of the normal, the normal definition of happiness, right? What does it mean to succeed? What does it mean to get ahead in life? Right? What does it mean to win at life? License of passion and immunity from punishment, right? To have whatever I want and get away with it, right? That's basically how we all define success, right? But think of the sanctions of eternal law. If you conform your spirit to better things, you have no need of human approval and reward. You have placed yourself among the more excellent. But if you turn to what is cheap and low, Do not expect someone else to punish you. You will have lowered yourself into a condition of squalor, right? I mean, in the end, her answer to the question, to the counterintuitiveness factor, right? When Boethius is like, the problem, how can we say this to anybody? No one's going to listen, right? And her answer ultimately is, not everyone is going to get it, right? People aren't going to see this, right? Why not? Because people are, if they're invested in a false definition of happiness, if people really believe that happiness equals license of passion and immunity from punishment, right? Then they're not going to buy it. They're going to think that wicked people win. They're like owls, right? Who can see in the dark but are blind in the daylight. James says, like Gollum, whose eyes were turned downward and who shook his fist at the yellow face. Yes, exactly. He had almost forgotten the sun. Yeah, exactly. Yes, Karita, there is indeed a New Testament verse in John 1 that talks about light coming into the world, but men love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Yes, you'll notice that Boethius isn't quoting that, right? But yeah, it does kind of sound like it, doesn't it? You're right, Karita, exactly, John. That's in John 1. Absolutely. Yep, that's exactly it. So look at our conclusion. From this, then, and for other reasons based on the principle that wickedness by its very nature makes men miserable, we see that an injury done to another causes unhappiness in the doer rather than the recipient. And if the wicked themselves could somehow see the virtue they had abandoned, and could be convinced that they could free themselves from the strain of vice and acquire virtue by undergoing punishment, they would ignore the pain, dismiss their lawyers, and give themselves up entirely to their accusers and judges, right? In this way, wise men could abolish hatred, for no one but a fool would hate good men, and hating evil men would make no sense. Viciousness is a kind of disease of the soul, like illness in the body. And if sickness of the body is not something we hate, but rather regard with sympathy, we have much more reason to pity those whose minds are afflicted with wickedness, a thing worse than any sickness. Nick, earlier on you raised the really important point about how this idea, the ideas that Lady Philosophy was saying about how wicked people cease to be people, really? Nick, you were voicing about how easy that would be to abuse. Right? Like to justify the slaying of the infidels because they're not really people, right? Agreed. Absolutely. And of course, that kind of abuse has often happened. But notice this is Lady Philosophy's answer to it, right? Hatred is right out. You don't despise the wicked. You pity the wicked, right? It's like a disease. And again, here's where this is the difference between the sort of from a height philosophical terms, absolutes, right, of goodness and wickedness, to again that examination of the human soul, of the real, like concrete, shades of gray human soul that everybody has, right? Wicked people are people whose minds are afflicted with wickedness, right? They're people, right? They have the same desire for happiness. They have the same divine soul, but they have wickedness like a disease, right? It's worse than a sickness. And we should regard them with sympathy. Because ultimately, that sickness is a terminal sickness. They're not going to get better from it, right? If they don't turn back. So ultimately, this is the Nick, when it comes to like putting these abstract principles onto flesh and blood human beings, this is where Lady Philosophy goes with it, right? Wise men, if you see the whole picture here, right? If you have your, Yeshayadwisness, then it abolishes hatred. You can't hate anybody. Obviously, you're not going to hate good people, and there's no point hating bad people. They're sick. Yeah. Now, Boethius still has a question. All right, so this comes to the end of tonight's section, just in time. But let's look at the setup for next time. Then I said, so Boethius asks, I understand that happiness and misery come to good and wicked men according to their merits. Still, I find that there is a mixture of some good and some evil in every man's fortune, as that term is properly understood. Surely, no wise man wants to live in exile, poverty, and ignominy. He would rather live prosperously in his own country and enjoy riches, honors, and the exercise of power. The operation of wisdom is manifested more effectively and recognized more clearly when the happiness of those who govern is shared by the people. And this is especially true when imprisonment and other consequences of legal punishment are imposed on the criminals for whom they were intended. That is, things are kind of better when, the system is just and justice is applied, right? Therefore, I am amazed and shocked to find this ideal turned upside down, so that punishments designed for the wicked are imposed on good men, and the rewards of virtue are seized by the wicked. I wish you would tell me how such unjust confusion can possibly be explained, for I would be less surprised if I could believe that all things happened as a result of accidental chance. But my belief in God and his governing power increases my amazement, since he often gives joy to the good and bitterness to the wicked, but on the other hand reverses this dispensation. How can all this be distinguished from accidental chance unless we understand the cause of it? Note two things. First of all, Boethius has not let go of the worldly things completely, right? He still thinks it matters. He still insists that it matters, right? Okay, yeah, I get the fact, he says, right? I get the fact that all that ultimately matters is the true happiness, right? And that, good people can't have their reward taken from them. Okay, agreed. But still, they kind of get a raw deal, right? I mean, bad things, even if not the biggest bad thing, still do happen to good people. And good things, even though not the good thing, still happen to bad people, right? Okay, granted that that's not what really matters ultimately, fine, but still in the short term, it's still better to have good things than bad things in the world, right? In other words, what he's doing is going back to book 2 in a sense, and all those things that were said about fortune. And fortune is hey, I'm in charge of stuff and I do things arbitrarily, right? I take stuff away and I mix it up and it doesn't make any difference. And he's okay, why does that happen? Why does that happen? In a sense, Lady Philosophy's answer, why do bad things happen to good people, they don't, right? Her answer has puzzled him a little bit more. He's okay, I grant that. Big picture, I grant that. But that makes the world, in one way, it makes the world make sense even less. Given that good people cannot be deprived of their reward, and bad people can't ever gain. They are powerless to get the good. Why does that not matter? Why is that so opposite to what we actually see? Why should that be? Why should it not match up? If the world is ordained by God and organized, by the good, powerful God, why does that happen? Shouldn't it match? Shouldn't it fit? Shouldn't it not sound like opposite world? Right? When you're looking at it from the highest heavens, why does it look like opposite world? Why should fortune happen? Why? So he's still not fully satisfied, right? He still needs more. And notice what he wants. He says, in a sense, I'd be okay if I could believe that it was just stuff happens, right? It's kind of random, right? Things get mixed around, right? The wheel of fortune turns, live with it. And he's I can't live with that because I don't believe in the randomness of stuff. If God's in control, why does he organize things this way? Why is it arbitrary? Why does injustice occur? Tune in next time when philosophy begins to answer that question and we begin to go into so my hope my hope is to do the rest of book 4 and book 5 in 2 more classes. We'll see if we can get there. Start here. So we're going to start in prose 6. So the last 2 sections, prose 6, is the last 2 prose sections and last 2 poems of book 4. And then we're going to do, probably not going to get much past the first prose section of book 5. Do start book 5, but it's really going to be like sections 1 and 2 at most of book 5 that we're going to get through next time, and then I'll try to do in one more class the rest of book 5. So that's the plan. Okay, so ideally, please do read all of book 5 for next time. Then we'll be ready for whatever happens. But definitely get through the first 2 prose sections and poems of book 5, and that's what we'll do next week. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining me, and I look forward to carrying on and talking about fate and providence. This is where the references, the Tolkien references, are going to come even more strongly, and you'll begin to see, I think, more and more, because this is the stuff that I think personally influenced Tolkien most of all. Lewis too. So, all right, thanks, everybody, and I will see you guys next week. Bye now.